Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Roaring. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. We got a lot to get to. Some Bengals, certainly. Some Joe Burrow, I'm going to guess, and all the Olivias he's around on a weekly basis. He's got Olivias coming out of his ears. We've got, of course, it's rivalry week. Kentucky, Louisville, and most of all, the crosstown shootout between Xavier and UC. And I guarantee you the UC fan base is squirming and the Xavier fan base is smiling because they know they've got him by the short hair. So we'll see how that goes. We got a lot to get to, Rick.
Yeah, let's start off with that. It's crosstown shootout week. And for my money, that's the biggest day in our city when it comes to sports. I love the crosstown shootout. I think we do it better than anything else in the city. Xavier comes in at 8-2. They're ranked 61st in KenPom. 58th in offensive efficiency, 74th in defensive efficiency. Cincinnati comes in at 7-1, ranked 17th in KenPom, 31st in offensive efficiency, 15th in defensive efficiency. Looking at KenPom today, Skinny, it looks like it's changed a point since I last checked it. KenPom now has Cincinnati as a 10-point favorite with an 81% chance of winning this game. Let's start there with the line, because this is something I did a podcast last night with Paul Fritzner and Mo Egger, and we actually both spent a decent amount of time talking about the line for this game. Where do you think it will come in at? Do you think we'll see a line as high as 9 or 10 for this game?
No, I'm going to say 6.5 to 7.5. That feels about right. Right or wrong, I think odds makers are smart enough to put recent history into it. Again, I'm not a big trend guy. We've talked about this before. I don't think you're a big trend guy either. I know everybody, the trend is your friend, but trends in a series like this do mean something. And there's one rating I didn't think you mentioned. I think in KenPom, I think Wes Miller's ranked number 1 in butthole pucker in this series. I think that's a big part. No, I think that's a big part of it. I truly think that's a huge part of this game. I
don't pay for the premium KenPom that you do. That's right. Pay behind the paywall. Yeah.
Right. That's correct. I'm sorry. Yeah. I shouldn't have let that go because I pay a premium price for that. But I do think that's a factor. And I think if you're Vegas, you have to look at that too. And I'm going to guess they do. So I'm going to say, and I could be dead wrong. If it's 10, sign me up right now for Xavier. I mean, if it's 10, sign me up. And if UC beats them by more than that, then kudos to them. But sign me up for that. I'm going to say 6.5 to 7.5.
Yeah, I would say nothing would surprise me in this year's matchup. I could see this going any number of ways, but I feel like it's a pretty standard rule that if the line gets over 5 or 6 in this matchup any given year, regardless of what the teams look like, you usually feel like you're going to bet the underdog in that situation, because more often than not, it ends up being a game that you feel like could come down to a toss-up type situation. When you look at this matchup between these two teams, the way it's been going for each of them, what's the biggest thing you're looking at? Is there a storyline that you're picking up on?
Well, let's start with UC. I know fans are squirming over the way they played for the first half against Howard. And I think Kentucky fans are probably the same way they played against Colgate. And I know, again, this is going to sound contradictory to where Xavier did with Morgan State. But I think the Kentucky game against Colgate, clearly, right? Your Louisville game Saturday. You're thinking more about that, right or wrong? You just are. It's human nature. For UC, Howard's a given. Yeah, it was a tough game on their floor last year. You're the better team. They ended up showing the second half they are clearly the better team. And I think that was a little bit of a, hey, Xavier's next. I know you could argue the contradictory part is, well, why didn't Xavier do that with Morgan State? Well, again, sometimes that team is so inferior that you just do what you did like Xavier did. But for me, it's who's that who's that guy for Xavier that you're not counting on that's going to hurt you, that ends up hurting you? I mean, the only thing I can think of in this series where a guy who you knew could hurt them was the year Trayvon Blewett just made every shot known to mankind, right? And they couldn't do anything to stop him because he was just that good that day. But it's usually like D. Davis slinging 5 threes over the top of his head with that ugly shot of his. I mean, it always feels like it's a weird guy who does something. So who is that guy for Xavier, in my opinion? We'll get to UC here in a second.
Well, I think Mick Cronin did a hell of a job of promoting that narrative that Xavier always had, like an unexpected star blow. I mean, it happened a few years, but it's also been like, Sule Boom, they acted like that was an unknown guy coming from out of nowhere. He ended up being Xavier's best player, And also I would argue that like Mick Cronin a lot of times encouraged an unexpected star to go off for Xavier, like a D. Davis or like a Karam Kanter, because he game planned to not guard those guys and give them lots of look and build their confidence. I always thought Mick Cronin did too much game planning for this game and kind of psyched himself out for a team that was really good defensively and that he didn't need to do much specific game planning for. He always did too much and let certain guys go off against him. I don't worry as much about that with this year's UC team and Wes Miller. But if there's a guy for Xavier that could be that X factor that gives them a big boost who hasn't been playing well, I think the most likely candidate is Dante Maddox. I mean, we've seen him playing a little bit more over the last few games. Now you have this Trey Green situation where he's taking an indefinite leave from the team due to a medical reason. And so when it comes to backup guards, Trey Green is going to get all of those minutes essentially now. And I think he does have that ability to heat it up, hit 3-4 threes in a game and give you a big scoring punch off the bench. So that would be the guy that I'd look to. Obviously, you could say like a Marcus Foster or a Dalen Swain haven't been as productive on offense as they're capable of, so maybe them. But Dante Maddox is the one that I think would really drive UC fans nuts.
All right, so here's the other question then. What is the Zach Freemantle matchup? Is it Dylan Mitchell? Is it Bandego? What's that matchup look like?
I would think they start with Mitchell on him, but at the same time, I think they'll probably rotate all of their front court players on him. We saw them struggle against Eric Dixon from Villanova. They like to guard opponents one-on-one, regardless of how good that opponent is.
Right.
And Eric Dixon beat them one-on-one, and he made them pay for that. That's one thing that I really have my eye on in this game from a Xavier perspective is if they give Zach Freemantle that opportunity to just play one-on-one, how much is Xavier able to ride him in this game, and can he deliver?
All right, so then that goes back to the Dalen Swain conversation you just had. Does that put Bandego on Dalen Swain, and can he guard him on the perimeter and not be able to be taken off the bounce? I think it's a weird matchup. And maybe in this case, maybe Wes has to go small more times than not.
That could be it. And maybe I'm incorrect. You might be right. Maybe Aziz will stay on Zach for that reason. Mitchell,
yeah, I don't know that either. But then Zach can take him out on the perimeter too.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see how that plays out. I do think they'll rotate the bigs defensively. UC's bigs are athletic. They're good defensively. I don't think they have an issue in terms of being able to match up with Xavier, but I do think their strategy of we don't play help defense, we guard you one-on-one and make you try to score over us can be a tough strategy when you have a team that's leaning heavily on one guy. And I think Xavier, quite honestly, would like to lean heavier on one or two guys in Zach Freemantle and Ryan Conwell right now.
Right, for sure. The flip side for UC is this, and this is a weird conundrum, right? You're trying to work Dan Skillings back in off the knee injury, and while he clearly, when he's healthy, is arguably one of the two best players on the floor, if not maybe the best player on the floor, you're still trying to work him in, and he's been gone for a while, and that doesn't come as easy as you think. You just don't throw a guy back in, and he's suddenly what he was, and your team is what it was. Kind of got to get used to each other again, and he's got to get used to the flow. I think that's a weird mix for me. It's if you're UC, it's better he's back, but trying to integrate him back now feels like it could be a tough circumstance, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think it's ideal. I mean, it's nice that they had the Howard game to at least see him back out on the floor and get some run in, but he didn't play a normal rotation there. And they didn't get sort of that chemistry back to having him in the lineup. Now, I will say we saw them without him against Villanova on the road, and I think it's clear they're a better team with Dan Skillings without question. So you'd much rather have him available for this game than not, but that's certainly a storyline. And I think the other part of it is, how does Xavier handle this UC defense? I mean, UC's metrics are off the charts when you look at them from a Ken Pom or Bartorvik perspective. And I think just watching them in person, I called the NKU game, obviously. They're really fast. They move well. They pressure the ball on the perimeter. And that's exactly what's given Xavier trouble recently in the last several games. Obviously, they looked great against Morgan State, a team that tried to play that style but didn't do it very well. But the 3 or 4 games prior to that, they had a lot of trouble against perimeter pressures. So I think that's the biggest storyline from the Xavier perspective is, will they be able to operate against this UC defense?
The other thing I'll bring up is this, and you remember last year UC lost a lot of close games in the Big 12, right? And it showed how competitive they were and, played well. And then you go to the Villanova game in a close game and they lose. And I go back to, is some of that on, I mean, I watch them sometimes on offense against good teams. And I literally question, what actions are you trying to run? What are you trying to do? What is the purpose of whatever that is you're doing? And it feels like in close games that comes back to bite them. And I don't want this to be a complete indictment on Wes, but I mean, at the end of the day, in close games, coaching is a big part of that. Coaching in close games against good teams is a big part of that. And I just don't know if he's quite there yet, to be frank.
Well, don't you think that's why this is such a big game for Wes Miller and UC?
Dude, it's huge for many reasons. You can't lose to your rival again when you have, and I think you'd agree with this, they're the better team. You can't
We
do
said
that.
Ken Pom said 81% chance of winning.
Yes,
I mean, that's
yeah.
odds are in your favor at that point.
Yes. Yeah. And so I mean, even a staunch Xavier fan would say they're the better team, and the metrics, they're the better team. Better team doesn't always win. And so that's where I go back to if, and you know how coaches can get. I think Mick got like that in the tournament some. Marvin Lewis got like that with the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's just certain teams where you coach differently. You swear you're not gonna. You swear your butthole's not going to be puckered, but it is. And it carries over to your team. And especially in tight games, if you're tight, it carries over.
Yeah, we've seen that obviously with the Cincinnati Xavier matchup, but for Wes Miller's standpoint, it's just been big games in general, right? It's like they look really good in these non-conference games or against some of the other like high major teams that are really struggling that they play in the non-conference. They'll beat them handily, like a Georgia Tech last year, for instance,
or this year.
But then they get into these closer games, and to your point, they end up not finding a way to win them. And for all the good that Wes Miller has done from a branding perspective and a recruiting perspective and all of that, they are going to ask him to win these games at some point. And this is one of those years where it's like, okay, you lost the Villanova game. Is this a here we go again trend? Or is this, no, we're all good. We beat Xavier finally. We got over that mental hurdle. Now we got a big game coming up with Dayton that we can really set ourselves up for a nice resume here going forward into Big 12 play.
No, and that's the point to this, Rick. You win those two games, and then again, let's just go, you finish whatever, 11, I'm playing 22 games or 20 games, whatever it is. Let's just say you finish a couple games over 500 in the Big 12. You do this in the non-con, have the one loss, and have this win, have a Dayton win, and I'm not sure how good Dayton is, but you finish off the non-con with that. Go 2 games over 500 in the Big 12. You're probably a 5 seed at worst. I mean that because the SEC is going to cannibalize itself. The Big 12 is going to cannibalize itself. So get yourself set up for that. You lose this game, and then you doubt creeps in for everybody, and then maybe you do have to go 13-7 or whatever the hell it is in the Big 12, and that's impossible.
Yeah. Any prediction here for this one?
I'm going to go UC with a win. I'll go UC 71-68. I think Xavier covers. But the thing is, if it is that close, I just don't know if I trust West to get the job done at the end of the game.
Skinny, I think the stat was, and I can't remember how many years this goes back. It might be like 30 years or something, but there's been like 13 or 14 games decided by 2 possessions or fewer in the rivalry. Incredible. Xavier is 13-1 in those, wow. I believe was the stat.
Wow. That's
incredible. I mean, it's just the same. And I think 7-0 in games decided by 1 possession, maybe something like that. Those numbers have been floating around the message boards. There's been a few different stats like that out there, but it really tells you all you need to know about the way these games have gone over the last decade plus 2 decades now. Kentucky, Louisville, you mentioned
hang on. Don't just point the finger at me. What you got?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I've done so many of these podcasts. I forgot that I didn't give my prediction on here. I did it on my previous show. 80-76 Cincinnati.
Okay, so we're kind of you got a higher scoring game than I've got, but we're kind of in the same vein.
Yeah, I think both of these teams are going to want to get up and down. Like Cincinnati doesn't want to play in the half court offensively. To your point, they seem to struggle when they get there, and Xavier definitely doesn't want to do that. So I think for the most part, they're going to be content to run against each other and see how it plays out from there. So maybe we'll just see both teams come out really tight and struggle to shoot, and that'll hold the scoring down.
Yeah, that's one thing I think. I don't think pace. My score isn't pace of play indicative. My score is shot making indicative.
And that's reasonable. But also you sometimes get some foul counts in these games that rise up. So I'm expecting a high score. I kind of like the over in this matchup. All right, Kentucky, Louisville, another big rivalry game this weekend. Skinny, Kentucky's win over Gonzaga 90-89 in overtime last week was just an incredibly fun basketball game, I thought. And I think if you're a Kentucky fan, all of a sudden you're looking at this and it's like, yeah, you had the early loss in a big game, but now you look at what you've done through this portion of the schedule, and this is, I'm pretty sure, the best resume they've put together in the non-conference since the 2014-15 team when they went 38-0 to start the season and lost in the Final Four to Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good resume when push comes to shove. They finish the regular season unbeaten. But yeah, to your point, the Clemson loss isn't an awful loss. It would have been, certainly a booster, but then you kind of made up for it. Because I think if you're a Kentucky fan, you're like, all right, split the Clemson-Gonzaga game. And you did. I mean, you split them in probably the way you didn't think you were going to split them. And back to the point of the SEC cannibalizing itself each other, you're going to have a bunch of teams that, 4 or 5 losses is going to probably win the SEC. and that's probably going to be just fine. And based on what all these teams have done in the non-con, your net rating, remember the Big 12 last year? It was the whole, the Big 12 was very smart in the way they did things. And then once they got into the Big 12 play, they don't hurt each other in net, and they help each other in net. And I think the SEC is going to do the same exact thing.
Well, and remember, they also beat Duke. That's two
Correct.
top 5 wins, according to Ken Pom, right now for this Kentucky team in the non-conference. They haven't done that very many times in recent history. So, yeah, they have really set themselves up well. You win this game, that's like a cherry on the top. Obviously, Louisville struggling a little bit. They lost 3 straight, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Duke, and then they beat UTEP by 3.
Yeah, believe it or not, I had a money line bet on UTEP last night. There's a prediction site I look at that had UTEP. They were 15-point underdog. I also had I had them getting the point, so I split the bet. But I'm like, the site had UTEP winning outright, and I went, yeah, why not? I'll put a shekel on it.
That is an interesting prediction that they made there, considering the way that game ended up playing out.
I know it.
You were really getting some excitement out of that one late.
I was going to say, I think they predicted 76-72 UTEP. And it was, I think, 75-72 Louisville, and UTEP had a clean look at a 3 to tie it at the end of regulation.
I think this rivalry is going to be fun again really soon. I don't think this is the year that we get to that point. I just don't think this Louisville team is very talented.
Yeah, and, Lamont Butler, I would think by the time Saturday comes around, is ready to play again at full speed, and I think that's a big factor. The fact they went to Gonzaga and won without him is amazing to me, because you know how much I think of him as a player and all the things that he does. So I obviously him being back is a big key to me. Louisville had that big win over Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken, and it looked like, oh wow, Louisville's back, and I don't know if they are quite back yet. And I do think
Pat Indiana.
I'm sorry, I knew it was one of the two. Yeah, I'm sorry, Indiana.
It's back to my 28, 89-61.
Got him good, and that was like, oh wow, okay, maybe they are for real. I just don't see it. And listen, I think the UTEP game, much like Kentucky and Colgate, is Louisville's also looking ahead to Saturday. I get it. I mean, that's human nature, man. So part of that was a reason for my bet on UTEP of, okay, this site predicts them to win. There's a look ahead factor, all those things. It almost came to fruition, didn't obviously, but I that's why I know if you're going to look at that and go, well, yeah, it's just they only beat UTEP by 3. Again, they're in the same spot you're in with Colgate, guys.
Yeah, Kentucky is predicted to win this game 83-72, so an 11-point margin from right. Ken Pom. Ken Pom gives the Wildcats an 85% chance of winning the game. That's where I'd be at in terms of prediction. I'd be right around that 10-point margin.
Too. Yeah, I would too. And
in favor of Kentucky. And I think this, I don't know this will be all that high scoring, though. I don't think Louisville scores that well. I think they'll probably try to muck this game up to some extent.
And I will say the one thing, and I know the Gonzaga game is going to smack in the face of this, Kentucky's actually pretty good defensively. You think of them as guys chucking in threes, and they were scoring all those points early in the year. They've dug in and won a couple of games, big games, because of their defense.
Yeah, and they are more of an offensive-minded team or offensive-led. They're 9th in the country in terms of their offensive efficiency, but their defense is top 32. Right. I mean, they're 29th in the country defensively. So to your point, they've not been bad on that end of the floor at all. I think because we talk about their offense, because we talk about Mark Pope's style and his system, we kind of almost always discredit the defense naturally because of the way we talk about them. But you're right, they're not bad defensively at all.
I mean, dude, they give up 39 points in the second half in overtime to Gonzaga. And again, you can also say they gave up 50 points in the first half to Gonzaga. You're right, they did. But then they dug in and got stops. Clemson game. I mean, the Clemson game was totally offense related. Why you lost that game? It wasn't. Again, you had a few defensive breakdowns, especially late in the game. But I mean, you held Clemson to 70 on their home floor. That should be a win for you. It wasn't, but it should be. So it shows to me when they have to dig in and get stops, they're good at it.
Not a big week for the Norse. They beat IU Indy first Horizon League game 66-64 in about the craziest fashion you'll ever see.
They walk-off goaltend
that was preceded by a fadeaway shot with like a second left that wedgied in between the rim and the backboard for a jump ball where they retained possession to set up the inbounds pass that led to the goaltend that won on a walk-off review call. So just a spectacular finish that IU Indy game. Then they beat a non-Division I University of the Cumberlands, an NAIA school, on Wednesday night. They'll play a really good Norfolk State team on Sunday. That's going to be a difficult test for them.
Norfolk just played somebody big, and I thought played them okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they played Baylor, and they were actually, I think, down by 6 at the half. They ended up losing 94-69. It became a blowout in the second half, but they played them tough initially there, and they've had some nice wins. They beat James Madison, who's ranked 125 in Ken Palm, and UC Davis is ranked 185. So they're going to be a good test for NKU. But I also wanted to bring up, you were mentioning the website that you used that gave you that UTEP prediction, right?
Yes.
You also called me before the NKU University of the Cumberlands game to give me another oddity that site had on it.
It had Cumberland's actually winning that game 76-71, I think. Now, again, some of the data for NAIA schools, I'm going to guess, to get plugged in probably skew that some, right? Because they're probably looking at raw data against similar opponents. But I did look at a score early. I went, they're hanging around. And obviously, they ended up being a comfortable NKU win.
I won't lie to you. There was a period there around the 8-minute media time out of the first half where I thought of our phone call when you told me that University of Cumberland's was projected to win that game by some random covers website that you use. And I had to think about that. I go, no, there's no way this is actually going to happen.
Correct,
NKU will be fine. And sure enough, they won 98-79.
Was that a decent roster? Because, as we know, NAIA schools can be weirdly constructed with some Division I guys that come out of nowhere and can play. I mean, Georgetown, Kentucky had a lot of those teams that were really good that you look and go, they got some dudes.
Yeah, they had a 6'11 guy that transferred down from a D1 that hadn't really done much for them prior to this game, but he played pretty well against NKU, played more extended minutes, and they've got a guard that's 6'2", and it's funny because he's not much of a shooter. They throw him a ton of lobs. He's like a freak athlete at 6'2", almost like he's skinny. He's not built like Russell Westbrook, but he kind of has that type of style of they're throwing him lobs and running alley-oops for a point guard that's 6'2", an interesting player. But yeah, I imagine they'll be pretty good in the NAIA level. All right, let's move on to the Bengals, Skinny. We'll start with the comments made by Joe Burrow following the Monday night win over the Dallas Cowboys. And obviously the news that everyone is talking about is what he had to say regarding Tee Higgins. Quote, I'm confident we are going to be able to do what it takes to bring T back. I know that I am going to do what it takes to get him back so he can have those talks. Those are going to be offseason discussions. I think we are excited about that opportunity. That was news in and of itself. It struck me as notable that Joe Burrow went out of his way to make those comments at this time. And then it got even more interesting on Wednesday when more news came out that Higgins has parted ways with NFL agent David Mulugheta, who has been very difficult for the Bengals to work with in recent years.
Yeah, so I did the post-game podcast, as you know, with Mike Petraglia, and I brought up that those rumors were circulating about him parting with Mulugheta, which then kind of led to me surmising this whole thing. So let's start with Joe's comments and what to take out of that.
Yeah.
For starters, don't think for a second, folks, he's taking any money of himself off the table. But what it does mean is he's probably willing to restructure to where a signing bonus is involved that takes some of the guarantees off the table that allows you to then prorate the signing bonus further down the road and spread out the money better. So I think I'm going to guess he's open to that. That's why if you're wondering if he has direct knowledge of this or has talked to the front office, probably not him, but his agent. And I'm going to guess he went to his agent and said, hey, if we're going to get this done with T, ask them what we can do. I'm going to guess it has to involve the signing bonus. And then tying that into him dropping Mulugheta made it really, and again, at the point I was talking about this with Mike on Monday after the game, or actually early Tuesday morning after the game, we didn't know that for a fact, but again, that rumor was out there, and I brought it up that, boy, it sounds like they know that A, Joe knows he's willing to restructure his contract, and B, the fact that if Mulugheta is no longer the agent, then there's an open line of communication. And again, listen, you can hate David Mulugheta because he took Jesse Bates away from the Bengals. You can also blame the Bengals for letting Jesse Bates walk, all those things. But for whatever reason, he's very hard line. He gets his agents, he gets deals done for his clients. But I also think T is one of those guys that went, listen, man, there's got to be some wiggle room here. We got to be able to negotiate. I want to stay there. They want me to stay there. You know, you can't just be so rigid. And maybe it got to that point where the agent's like, no, man, just shut up and let me do the negotiating. And T was, no, I want to be with these guys. I don't need a hard line price. I need it to be close. And I want to get somebody else to represent me to try to do that. So I think Joe Burrow did not speak that off the cuff. Now, it was weirdly asked because it was actually, I think Paul Dehner asked a question about Jamar Chase off the crazy night of, hey, that guy's got to get paid, right? I can't remember how Paul phrased the question. And then he went into Tee Higgins' diatribe, and you should have seen the look on those of us that cover the team. We all looked at each other like, wait, what? He's really doing this?
I mean, it was manna from the heavens for you
Yes.
beat writers trying to
Yes.
figure out what you're going to write about and talk about for the next 4 weeks
Yes.
as this team slogs through the rest of this meaningless season. And he just gives you an absolute gift like that to make that statement. And even if he's not restructuring any of his deal or giving away any money, just the fact that he's making that bold statement of, I'm confident we can get T back, which if nothing else says to me, he has said to the Bengals front office, I want that guy. I want him to stick around, do what you need to do to keep him. Maybe some of that's lip service. I don't know, but it says something to me that he went out of his way to do this. And then when you factor in the agent part of it, it really seems like there's a lot of smoke to this getting done potentially for the Bengals. And I also think, Mulugeta has kind of like that Scott Boras reputation.
Yep.
For Scott Boras being the MLB agent who's known as kind of the hardline guy, gets his guys the biggest deals all the time. And I feel like when you're firing your agent, I'm sure there are other reasons to do so, but oftentimes it's because either you're not as good anymore and you need someone that can get you more opportunities because you're just not high enough priority for the current agent that you have, or you feel like your agent isn't negotiating on your behalf the way you want them to. And that's, I think, where everyone kind of leans with this Tee Higgins situation coming up right now is the Bengals are trying to get something done with him. If he's open to that and David Mulugeta is just standing in the way constantly and not budging at all, maybe that's what led to this decision for him to look for a new agent. And if so, I mean, you'd have to feel really good about that if you're someone who wants Tee Higgins back with the Bengals. The second part of that, Skinny, is should fans want Tee Higgins back with the Bengals? We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, at the right price. And I'm of that ilk of, I don't know what the right price is, but if it's the right price, it still allows you to address the other needs that you have, and you have a laundry list of them. Listen, I don't want this to become the Dan Marino Dolphins, where it was Dan Marino, Mark Clayton, and Mark Duper, and they put up a lot of points, and yet they never really did anything and advanced very deep. They got to a Super Bowl once. Joe Burrow and Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase have gotten to a Super Bowl to this point once. So I don't want this to be the, hey, great, I got Jamar and T and Joe, and okay, that's great, but the three of them can't play 3-on-11, and they can't go on play on defense too, and you need all those things. And those Dolphins teams, the Dan Fouts, Wes Chandler, Charlie Joyner, John Jefferson Chargers teams, they were a whole lot of fun. They put up a lot of points. They were great. Charlie Joyner's in the Hall of Fame. Dan Fouts is in the Hall of Fame. They were great. Never got to a Super Bowl. And I don't want it to turn out to that of, we got these fun little toys, but the rest of the roster stinks and you can't get to a Super Bowl. And so you have to gauge that too.
So I've been agreeing with that for most of this season, thinking they definitely don't want to bring both of them back. And heck, they may not even want to bring Jamar Chase back in some ways. But I wonder, the more I look at this season and the way it's gone and the way this defense has just turned into a complete disaster that looks like it has no pieces that you'd want to move forward with or need to move forward with. Do you trust this organization to be able to put together a defense giving all the pieces that they need to figure out on that side of the ball? Or do you just say, hey, at least we got two guys that give us one hell of a chance already on offense. If we give them this third that's been pretty darn good, at least we know we have a starting point that makes us competitive. Maybe we'll get lucky through the draft or a free agent that we can we can cobble something together on defense, especially in a league that's dominated by the pass.
Yeah, and I will say that's a fair point. And so I will take it to the other degree of this, of let's just say you get this done. You'll have now then a window of at least 5 years probably to have all three of those guys still together, maybe even a sixth year potentially. If you can't get it done in a couple of off seasons in that 6-year window to address the defense, well, then shame on all y'all. I mean, that then literally does point to personnel decision-making at that point. So, yeah, you're right. You have a foundation and a great starting point. And it was a different era because the money was not what it was and free agency wasn't what it was. But I'm going to guess the Dolphins thought, got a hell of a starting point. We got Dan Marino and Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, and we'll figure out the offseason. And they never did. And so that's my only fear of, to your point, I don't know if I do trust. But I also know that, again, if you sign these guys to long-term deals, you've got a long window to get it right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that would be what I'd feel better about, though. If you get all three of them into a window where you've got them, then you may never get the defensive thing right, but I feel better that you'll luck into having a usable defense, a defense that's competitive, than I do you'll be able to figure out both sides of the ball if they're mediocre. Because, I mean, I think if you strip Joe Burrow of his weapons, we've seen this offense go downhill pretty quickly. We've seen the way they started this season, even looking really pedestrian, even with Joe Burrow back there at quarterback. So I don't know that I want to see both sides of the ball become mediocre to bad.
No, and that's a fair point. I fully understand that part of it. And, even as bad as the defense has been, they've had weird good moments, like the Baltimore game where the first 7 drives, all they got out of it was a field goal. And then all of a sudden they got torched on 4 straight possessions. So it does feel like it. This is going to sound so glass half full. And I feel like I'm a realist. But anyway, it does feel like you are close, but at the same time, it feels like you're far away because games against good teams, you just haven't gotten the job done. And at some point, those numbers add up of you're 1-6 against team or 0 and whatever against teams above 500 records. That speaks volumes to me, even though all those games are close.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't see how you see the defense being close. Right? I think this defense is as bad as it's ever been
agree with that.
In the last 15 years. I mean, it's horrible.
But again, can you rectify that in 2 off seasons? I don't think you can rectify that in an off season. Can you rectify that in 2 off seasons?
Can some NFL franchises do that? Yes. Can the Bengals do it? I have zero faith in that happening other than them getting blindly lucky with young draft picks.
The one off season I will say they got right, and I think it was the same off season, might have been back to back, was the Chidobe Awuzie, Trey Hendrickson off season. I mean,
yes.
If Cheeto doesn't blow up his knee, he's still on this team and is a shutdown corner.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely bad luck for them, and that set them back. Their secondary has become a disaster, and that's part of the reason for it. But I don't know. It's funny. It's amazing how easy you're able to be swayed when you feel like getting Tee Higgins is an option again. Because I was of the belief that it wasn't an option. I was like, okay, that's fine. They don't need him. I don't think that's what they should be doing anyways. But now all of a sudden, when it feels like a realistic possibility again, I'm like, well, maybe that is what they should be doing, quite honestly, because I'm really discouraged with what I've seen from them on the defensive side. And I don't have a lot of faith that they have a plan to fix that going forward. I don't know how you could fix it in one offseason.
Yeah, and maybe Mulugeta felt out the market, right? And the market told him, hey, your guy's not going to get what you think he's going to get because he's injury prone. When T's healthy, he's a very good player. I've never thought he's the number 1 wide receiver. I don't know if he goes anywhere, but he's a damn good 1A to 2 for sure. That part's not even in doubt when he's healthy. But maybe he felt out the market and he's got a staunch price. And the market told him, not going to get it from anybody. And at that point, T's like, well, I'm not going to get it from anybody and I'm going to get a decent, fair price here. I'd rather stay here.
Could be. I mean, it's interesting to see this played out because a lot of times you get all these fans speculating, you hear all these rumors, and then it plays out. It's not at all true. This is one of those times where the speculation and rumors seem to be right in line with the way this is playing out so far. So you have to think there's at least something to it.
And let me go back to end, wrap this up. When Joe Burrow says something like that, Joe Burrow isn't speaking off the cuff.
Yeah, agreed. Joe Burrow's house got broken into. He didn't want to speak about that much at all. I'll just say this, Skinny. They're thinking that this might be a sophisticated ring of criminals that are breaking into celebrities' houses, athletes' houses. They're targeting them. I would hope so, because I think personally, if I'm just like a run-of-the-mill guy from Anderson Township who decided to break into a house, I'm not going to choose the guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars, who is maniacally competitive and just told the world that he's purchasing a Batmobile.
Yeah.
That seems like a bad guy to go after. The guy who's into vigilante justice.
Yeah. My fear is this happens more often and especially with high price celebrities. It was always interesting to me and Kentucky fans always knew where John Calipari lived, right? And the vitriol at the end was really high. It surprised me that somebody didn't act goofy there, and I'm glad they didn't, nor should they. But it was very public of where he lived, right? And that seems odd to me. Like, I knew where Joe Burrow lived. I think a chunk of people did, because actually I have a friend of mine's mom, or his friend of mine's in-laws live very close to that house, and so most people who were in the know knew, and these people obviously knew. And I do think it is a sophisticated ring. Maybe we find out it's a bunch of jokers when they catch him, but for the security that he had, for them to be able to get through that and then find an escape route, probably through the woods, it sounds like they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I guess I just don't really understand the targeting athletes thing. Is it just because they're out of town a lot? I mean, I would think they would have someone looking after their house, but like...
Right, but they seem like they've been able to get through whatever security levels there are, and that tells me there is a level of sophistication there.
I think so, but I guess my point is there's some thought that athletes are being specifically targeted, and I just wonder, it's like, well, they're in these huge expensive neighborhoods. It seems like all of those houses would have expensive things in them and nice jewelry to steal. I wonder if, like, why would the athletes be the ones targeted unless someone just wants to go after them or something? I don't get that.
That could be it, but also to your point, when Joe Burrow was out of town. I mean,
true, but you would think all of these guys would have people watching over their house while they're gone at this point.
Well, he had Olivia. I don't know which Olivia. He's got 1,000 Olivias. It was an Olivia.
He didn't seem too happy about that getting out there.
No, he did not.
Yeah, there's a young lady living with them who had been rumored to maybe be dating him. They were seen at the fashion show in Paris this year. So those rumors had been out there, and now she was the one who called in the break-in. She was living at the house. So he did not want to talk about that. He did not seem happy that was out there. But is that, like, you think he doesn't want all the other girls on the road knowing that he's got a girlfriend back at home? Or is that like just he's a private guy?
He's very private. I mean, he was engaged to an Olivia, not this Olivia. And they broke it off. Supposedly, we don't know for sure, but the assumption is that they broke it off back a few months ago. So since then, it seems like he's been a bachelor about town. And you know what? Good for him. I got good. I mean, good for you, my guy. You do you.
I heard that they assembled a task force to look into this and some other high profile break-ins in the area.
I did not hear that, but that would make sense to me.
Why are we wasting our time with our communities, police officers, people that are paying taxpayers' dollars? Just get the Bengals fans task force on this. Get some dudes from Twitter, those guys that are constantly tweeting at like the Ravens fans and the Steelers fans. Put them on the case. One, they'll be more efficient. And two, you won't have to waste any real officers' time or money because these guys will take care of it for you, no charge.
And civil liberties be damned, man. They'll get the answers, and you don't have to worry about civil liberties.
I mean, you saw what happened with this guy, the healthcare CEO getting shot. I mean, the internet finds these people in like a minute. Bengals fans, with the way they act online, there's no doubt that they would be able to find these guys, regardless of if they're in Colombia or wherever else doing this mess.
Exactly. That's a good call.
All right, college football, the final college football playoff poll was revealed. The bracket has been assembled, Skinny. We've got Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State as the teams with the byes. The first round matchups look like this. 5 seed Texas takes on 12 seed Clemson. 6 Penn State takes on 11 SMU. 7 Notre Dame takes on 10 Indiana. And 8 Ohio State takes on 9 Tennessee. I don't think there was a lot of controversy when it finally came down to the end, but the big one was SMU getting in over Alabama. Alabama finished at 9-3 with losses to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. SMU finished 11-2 with losses to BYU in the regular season, and then Clemson in the ACC championship game. I mean, that was decided. That final spot of the college football playoff was decided by a field goal just before midnight on the final championship game. I mean, it really came down to the very bitter end in terms of deciding this thing, but I thought it was a pretty easy decision to make. I had no issue with them leaving Alabama out.
Yeah, and Clemson, I think, would have been left out had it lost that game, right? And then Alabama would have been in. And while I would tell you, and I think you'd agree with this, Alabama, SMU on a neutral field, Alabama would be favored. I don't know if it'd be high, but they would be favored. And you can argue that makes them the better team. But I also say, don't go lose to Oklahoma. I mean, just shame on you. That's
Vanderbilt.
That's what cost you. In Vanderbilt, right. Yeah, don't go lose there. And so I don't have any pity for that. I don't. I normally could make a really staunch argument of, like I said, put the two on a neutral field. Who would be favored? Alabama would be favored. I think Alabama's probably a better team. But you know what? A couple times this year where you were the better team, you didn't prove it. You got smacked by 3 touchdowns at Oklahoma, and they were awful.
Alabama fans were some of the people whining when this playoff field got expanded because these other teams don't have a chance to win a national championship. They shouldn't be involved in the playoff. And now you're whining because you couldn't get into that expanded 12-team playoff with all those teams that don't have a chance to win a national championship. I feel this way oftentimes when it comes down to March Madness and the NCAA tournament in basketball. Those final teams that are the last teams that get left out, I don't feel bad for them because usually their resume stunk. That's right. The same thing here with Alabama.
And people will go, well, what about like an NC State and the run that they made? Okay, it's fun. It was good for them. But you know what? I could also have a scenario they get bounced in the first 4.
Yeah, and I'm not saying about that they won't be able to win games once they're in, whether it's SMU or Alabama. But my point is the people who are saying it's unfair that Alabama didn't get in, to me, it's like, well, you lost to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. If this wasn't an expanded playoff field, we wouldn't even be talking you as remotely relevant in a normal season.
Correct.
So I have no issue with them getting left out. I think what it comes down to simply is just you lost to 2 unranked teams in Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, and SMU's only loss during the regular season was to a ranked BYU team. And, you can talk about how good BYU actually is, but to me, that seems like pretty simple math to be done. I know there's a little bit more nuance there. I know the SEC teams are playing much more difficult schedules than these other teams are, but that's part of what you guys decided to do when you formed a super conference.
And here's what I hope this shows the SEC. I hope it shows them this. Don't go to a 9th conference game, man. Don't do it. 8 in this league right now is enough, because you cannibalize yourselves a little bit. And you thought that the cannibalization was going to be, well, we just lost to another good team, we're okay. Well, no, then you can't slip up and lose to a bad team. And they're talking about that 9th conference game. Don't do it. I'm just don't do it. It may be better revenue-wise. Listen, all these teams, if they're going to get an extra bye game out of this, you're going to fill up Bryant-Denny Stadium. It doesn't matter who you play. It doesn't need to be an SEC game.
The problem is television, and I know this has been said ad nauseum, but it's so true in a way that it isn't in any other sport at this point. Television controls every aspect of college football. So much so that they can't make any decision, even if it's the best thing for them. It is just controlled completely by television. And so I don't think you're going to see them hold off from adding that 9th SEC game during the regular season. I don't think they're going to do anything that creates more made-for-TV moments. They're going to continue to do that. And then here's the problem. Instead of leaving the playoff or slightly adjusting it, maybe if you want to do something with the automatic buys, maybe those shouldn't go the way they went to the championships. But I mean, I think what was instead going to happen is the SEC is going to say, hey, wait, this isn't fair. We're playing more difficult schedules than everyone else. Actually, let's change the rules again and put more of our teams in somehow. They're just going to find another way to adjust it to get more SEC teams in. But quite honestly, I love the way this first year sets up. It's imperfect. It creates weird, wonky matchups that probably don't make for the best overall bracket.
The path for Oregon is insane, and the path for Arizona State is also insane in a different way.
Skinny. I mean, tell me about your favorite first round matchup, because it's arguable. This is actually a question that we got sent in for Ask Skinny Anything. I can ask it to you now.
Sure.
Is it possible that the first round of the playoffs are more compelling than any of the potential quarterfinals?
Yes. Yeah. Other than the quarterfinal of Oregon and Ohio State. I mean, that would be extraordinary.
What's your favorite first round matchup?
2 of them for sure. I mean, Notre Dame, Indiana, just because it's in the state of Indiana, and Indiana, it's one proving ground game this year. It lost to Ohio State, but I think it lost in part because of special teams, right? And so are you going to have special teams gaps here? That being said, I could have a scenario where Notre Dame should have been the 2 seed. I mean, they wiped that Northern Illinois loss right off the planet, and they're playing great football. And then to me, Tennessee, Ohio State's extraordinarily compelling because I think they're both great teams.
Yeah, that's going to be a really fun game. And then to your point, it sets up for a matchup with Oregon in the second round. That's going to be awesome either way. If it's Ohio State, great. You get the rematch from an awesome game. But even Tennessee, Oregon would be a fun quarterfinal game. So
no question.
Yeah, I really like this. Penn State, Skinny, for a team that one shouldn't. I mean, why they're ranked ahead of Ohio State when Ohio State blasted them at Penn State doesn't really make sense. Other than the fact that they release these rankings every week, and once you put a team ahead of another team and then they don't lose, you're kind of just stuck with that. That might be something they have to look into going forward. But this Penn State team, the draw they have after losing the Big Ten championship, and it's because they lost the Big Ten championship that they ended up with this draw. They would have to beat SMU, then potentially play Boise State, which is clearly the worst team with a bye, and then one of Georgia, Notre Dame, or Indiana, which at that point, you're in the semifinals.
Yeah, at that point, it should be a hard game.
And you've got, I mean, honestly, I think Georgia is probably the best out of those 3 teams. We would agree.
Except we don't know what the Carson Beck injury situation is.
I was just going to say, they may not even have their quarterback. And even if they do have Carson Beck, I think everyone would agree this isn't the Georgia of the last 2 or 3 seasons. It's a much more beatable Georgia team. I mean, Penn State was just an incredible draw here.
Yeah, no, there were people making arguments that Oregon, if they didn't know how it shook out, should have lost that game to Penn State, should have thrown it.
Seriously. And then Texas, I mean, you got to feel like they're a heavy favorite to reach the semis, right?
Yes, very much so. But again, they've got a Quinn Ewers problem at the moment, right? Because he is a good player. He's their guy. But they got the Arch Manning looking over the shoulder thing. Quinn didn't play very well down the stretch. I mean, even the Kentucky game, I mean, they had that drive where they literally ran the ball on every play that clinched it. I mean, Kentucky had the ball down 10, and we can agree this turned out to not be a very good Kentucky team, but they had it down 10 in the fourth quarter with possession, and it wasn't Quinn Ewers that led them down the field to clinch it. They just turned to the running game and said, here. And so they have a bit of a Quinn Ewers problem at the moment because the more he struggles, I think the more the news tightens on the decision that Sark has to make, and that aura of Arch Manning hanging over everything is, I think it's really troublesome.
That's a tough spot to be in when the fan base has completely flipped and they've decided you're no longer the guy anymore.
Right.
It's a lot of pressure for a college quarterback to handle. And I think that's kind of the position Quinn Ewers has found himself in now. All right. I think that's enough on the college football playoff.
Real quickly, the only tweak I think I'd make, I do think the conference champions do deserve automatic bids, but I think at that point you just seed it 1 through 12 no matter what. They get automatic berths, and the best group of 5 team gets an automatic berth. So that's 5 in a given year. But then they shouldn't be slotted in the bye spots. I think that's the tweak moving forward of once you have the berths and then the at-larges, then you seed them. I mean, like, let's say Vanderbilt wins the SEC basketball tournament at 19-15. They don't get a 4 seed because of that. They get whatever seed they deserve. They get in, they get whatever seed they deserve. And I think that's the tweak that has to be made moving forward.
Right. I think that is what they should do. It makes for the best bracket overall. But I got to say, I love the goofiness of this first year. The fact that it's imperfect makes it more fun. I'm with you. I don't need perfect because there's never perfect. I need a better solution. And I think that's what you'll see, to be honest. They'll rectify that for sure. I mean, that's a glaring issue. It was a good idea at the time. It just didn't play out the way everyone thought. And also, by the way, realignment has continued to evolve since they originally made that decision. I mean,
that's right.
They had 5 power conferences when they made that decision, and now they no longer do. So, all right, real quick on Cincinnati, we've got some new verbiage in the college football landscape. Skinny, Brendan Sorsby has agreed to a deal to return for a second year at Cincinnati, according to Pete Thamel. Also, star defensive tackle Dante Corleone announced on social media that he's returning for a redshirt senior season in 2025. Very good news for the Bearcats. I mean, if you're looking at this year's team, the 2 guys that you would say love to have them back are those 2 guys right there. So those are a great starting point for Scott Satterfield and his staff.
So here's the thing, and I didn't even think of this until this morning. I was listening to Kentucky Sports Radio, and they were talking about Dane Key, the Kentucky wide receiver who's entered the transfer portal and has said he wants to go play for a national championship. And they brought up the fact, it's not a fact, they brought up a rumbling that Dane has been offered $800,000 to try to return to Kentucky in NIL. And I always thought the transfer portal of you're just looking for the next best situation, right? Now it's become, and to the point of Brendan Sorsby, I'm going to guess he dipped a toe in the water, felt around and go, what can you guys give me? What can you guys give me? And to your point, he's agreed to a deal to return. So he got probably the money he wanted and looked for in a situation he probably is comfortable with. You don't want to keep changing teams and situations. This has become total free agency now. This isn't just become, I'm going to transfer to another school because of this, because I want to play. Now I'm dipping my foot in it. And, oh, by the way, maybe the team I'm leaving goes, hey, dude, we'll give you this if you come back.
Well, and here's the really frustrating part of that, Skinny, is you might agree to a player, say, hey, let's get you to transfer this year. You've got 2 years of eligibility left. So we're signing you a 2-year deal. We're going to pay you this much over 2 years. Well, okay, you do that for the first year, but he has a really good year. There's nothing that holds him to that second year. So now he says, actually,
it's not a written contract.
It's best for me to go back into the portal because these other schools are now off. Yeah, you gave me $250,000, but I'm now worth $500,000 to all these other schools. So, from a good business perspective, from a money-making perspective, and me setting myself up,
what you got?
I am going to go take this $500,000 unless you guys can bring your offer up. So, you are just constantly renegotiating these things. And yeah, hearing this deal, the verbiage used here is, a player that's already on your team has agreed to a deal to return again for next season is just a world that I don't think fans are ready to stomach at all.
I can't see this being sustainable. I'm going to shut up on that topic because it's insane.
It's here. It's sustained. No one likes it. No one wants it, but it's here and it's not going away. I think the toothpaste is out of the tube on that. But man,
I
it's a
swear,
disaster from a fan's perspective.
and I'm not feeling sorry for these coaches because they make millions of dollars, but I just can't imagine trying to navigate that landscape. I can't. I just can't. I can't wrap my arms around trying to navigate that landscape of trying to recruit high school kids, retain your current roster, know that guys are going to go in the portal, guys that you didn't think would go to the portal that you're trying to retain because oh crap, we need him back. We got to pay him this amount, and then going out and then going to the portal, figuring out what players fit you. How do you some of it is you can't scout them individually. You're looking at tape. God, how much tape are you watching of a lineman from Holy Cross that's trying to go up the ladder, or a lineman from South Dakota that's trying to go up? I can't imagine that.
Skinny, there was something that I've been talking about with going back to the Mark Stoops issues last year, where he was telling the fan base he needs more NIL money if they want him to compete with the likes of Georgia and top SEC schools. I kept saying he better be careful with that, because at some point the schools are just going to say, hey, if all we need to do is pay our players more money, then we're going to quit paying you $8 million a year.
Hello, Mike Gundy.
We finally saw that. Yeah, Mike Gundy has been asked to take a lesser salary going forward because the school wants some of that money back for NIL all of a sudden. And if he doesn't do it, they're just going to fire him.
Rick, you're the first guy I thought of when I heard the Mike Gundy. I'm like, man, Rick called that. He's dead right. And I think that's what you're going to see moving forward.
Yeah, that's just the beginning of it. But that's going to any school that is in a bad spot with their head coach, doesn't think their head coach is living up to expectations. That's going to be the new move. It's like, well, hold on. Let's renegotiate this contract and pay you less now. We need more of that money back for NIL if you can't coach, because we clearly need to get you better players. And it's like, if you're a coach, how do you argue against that? Because you've been arguing, that's been your argument the whole time of we need more money for better players. So, okay, yeah, that's what we want to do. Go ahead, give us some of your money back.
No, you are literally the first guy I thought of.
Somehow none of the coaches saw that coming. They are idiots.
Yeah, no, I mean, you called that, and when I saw the Mike Gundy thing, I went, huh. This is actually coming to fruition. Rick was dead right on this. And to your point, I think that is what happens moving forward with a lot of these deals.
It was obvious as soon as it started happening last year. It's like, well, we know where this is going. Why are you guys trying to make it happen faster? And sure enough, we're already here.
Because that's the thing. Because some of it is you hire a coach, because he's great X&O guy, but also because of his recruiting acumen. Well, the recruiting acumen doesn't have a whole lot to do with it anymore. The dollars have everything to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still think building relationships and being a slick talker and all those things, certain guys will be better at it than others. You'll all have money to some extent. But yeah, if you don't hit it out of the park right away with all the resources you're given, then the first thing the administration is going to do is go, oh, okay, well, you're actually not as good as we thought. We need more NIL money then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One other note on UC is they did fire cornerbacks coach and special teams coordinator Kerry Combs, a local guy that's obviously been talked about a lot in this city for years. At one point, I think everyone thought he was the next head coach of Cincinnati football. This is going back before Luke Fickell was ever even named the head coach. I think this is a pretty clear sign that Scott Satterfield is safe, right? Like he's not going anywhere if you're starting to fire some of the assistants.
Well, not now, but again, you got one more year to get this right, in my opinion. You got one more year. That's it. And I wonder, is Kerry the fall guy for them not recruiting Cincinnati very well?
Seems like it, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. Is Scott Satterfield building relationships with the local schools? It seems like to me, you've had two coaches who didn't recruit the city very well, Tommy Tuberville and now this cat. And guess what? Both of them suck.
It seems pretty simple from that perspective. And I think absolutely Kerry Combs is just a sacrificial lamb in this spot because they needed to make a splash that made it sound like they were doing something. And he's probably the most recognizable coach on the staff, given the city that you're in and his reputation here. So you mentioned that he gets next year, Satterfield gets one more year at least. And I think it's very obvious when you look at his buyout situation. If Satterfield is fired prior to December 31st of 2025, meaning the end of next year, after the end of next year, he will receive 100% of the remaining contract, which is around $15 million. If he is fired after December 31st of 2025, he will receive 70% of the remaining contract, so around $8 million. It's pretty obvious that becomes a totally different story at that point.
Yeah. At 12:01 on January 1st, 2026, if he doesn't have a good year next year, night.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're headed in this situation. I think
Kerry Combs, and I'll be honest with you, and I think that's fair. I think you listen, 2 years I don't think is fair, right or wrong, no matter where you're at as a UC fan with the program. I get your frustration, and you're rightfully so. You're rightfully so with the hire and not liking the hire. But yeah, 3 years in, I'm not making this guy go away for my mistake for 15 mil. I'll make him go away for 8 for my mistake. But yeah, I'm not making him go away for 15 mil for my mistake. I'm gonna have to live with my mistake for one more year if I'm John Cunningham.
But it's tough because the fan base has lost all enthusiasm behind Satterfield. It is a lame duck season coming up in everyone's mind. So getting the buy-in, getting the NIL donors to put forth the money, all of that stuff is going to be a real struggle this year.
It is, but you found a way to get Dante Corleone and Brendan Sorsby back. It's a good starting point.
Yeah, no doubt. One other college football point, a flag planning note. We had all the flag planning issues that started fights. Ohio State Representative Josh Williams introduced the OHIO Sportsmanship Act Tuesday. The act would make it a felony offense to plant a flag in the center of Ohio Stadium. Skinny, I see you clapping over there. This is soft. Come on.
I told you. You know what? I told you my rectification for this.
Shoot them.
No, well, I've done
That'd be better.
No, I used to say shoot them if they ran on the field. Like,
yeah,
I agree. On the field, you are subject to being shot. You're forewarned. You want to try to do it? Dodge the bullets. Go for it. No, you forfeit the game. That's my point. I said it last week. You plant a flag, and that game over. You literally, the refs stand there and wait. If they see a flag coming out, you wait. The second flag, you do this and go forfeit.
That's a better idea. Can we just leave it to the game and the players and the coaches and the refs? I don't think police officers need to be macing players over flag planning.
And Pat Forty.
And Pat Forty. And I don't think police officers need to be arresting people and charging them with felonies over planting flags on football fields. This just seems like the softest thing in the world. And by the way, it's never going to actually come to fruition. So this is only a PR thing to make Ohio State look bad. Terrible move by this representative.
Yeah, something needs to be done about storming courts and fields and all that. It's just asinine.
I like the sniper idea the best. Just put them up there on the roof and let them pick people off as soon as they start running on the field.
Attention fans, if you go onto the field, you are subject to being shot. Please be forewarned.
And remember, enjoy your stay here at Paycor Stadium.
Exactly.
All right.
Speaking of which, why don't fans ever storm the field in an NFL game?
Is it the parity of the league? You mean like after like a big win? You mean?
Yeah.
Well, those drops down from the NFL seats to the field are kind of steep.
That's a fair point.
Like doing some ankles.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Karen will be going to the office on Monday with a couple of high ankle sprains.
That's a fair point.
Yeah. All right, let's get into our pick'em segment. We only had one game. It was the Bengals game last week. I went 1-1 because the Bengals did cover. Both of us have the over, and it went under. So you were 0-2. I am 47-49 overall. You are 52-44. Both of our best bets hit. I had Boise State. You had Georgia. And I mean, I feel like the best bet segment is just on fire over the last couple of months. So hopefully you guys have been taking advantage of that. Then Sunday at 1 p.m., we've got the Bengals as a 4.5-point favorite at Tennessee. The total is 46.5.
Yeah, Tennessee just shoots itself in the foot so often. Will Levis will make this crazy good throw on occasion. We're like, damn, look at that dude's arm talent. And he actually has played better of late. But I do think there's something to the Bengals getting that win to kind of get that feeling back again. They're the better team. And I truly think that I don't think they're going to catch fire and get the playoffs. There's just too much hurdles to go past. But I think they go on the road and win this game fairly comfortably. I'll go Bengals 30, Tennessee. I like to give weird scores nowadays. Tennessee 18.
30-18. So that is Bengals and the over. Over is the total is 46.5.
Yep.
I'm going to go Bengals 28, Titans 21. Bengals and the over as well for me. Tennessee is 2-11 against the spread this season.
Yep.
That seems like a one chart pick right there. It's just like Tennessee sucks against the spread. Neither of these teams are consistent, but you just roll with the Bengals in this situation, I think. It feels very similar to last week's game against the Cowboys, where it's like, well, now that the pressure's off, the Bengals will find ways to pull these games out.
Yep.
What's your best bet, Skinny?
I got two, and people are going to have to wait until Friday to figure out what the lines are for this. If Xavier's anything getting 7.5 or more, that would be one. And if Kentucky is a single-digit favorite of any kind, even 9.5, and that's usually a rope you in. That 9.5 usually says, oh, they want you to take Kentucky. I just think in a rivalry game at home, and if, again, Lamont Butler is back, which I expect him to be, I just think they're clearly the better team on their floor. So I may even have two best bets. If Kentucky's a single-digit favorite, and if Xavier's getting anything 7.5 or higher.
All right. So you are going with the rivalry week in college basketball. I'm going to go Army -5.5 in college
I thought
football.
about that one too. It just that rivalry always scares me because it's just such a good one, and I think Navy's good. I got suckered into them obviously earlier this year with Notre Dame, as you recall. We were on total opposite sides of the fence. But boy, I think this Army team. I think Tulane's good, and Army kicked their ass.
I'm so glad you just said that about Navy because it makes me so much more confident about my Army pick. I
would have taken Army. It's just the rivalry.
Don't say that.
Scared me off.
Say you really think Navy's good again. I liked that.
I really think Navy's good again.
Okay, thank you. All right, ask Skinny anything. Bill Belichick to North Carolina, Skinny. I mean, what the hell is going on there?
He's setting his kid up for a job. That's what's going on there. That's literally what it is, in my opinion.
Are you surprised that he's not trying for an NFL job? That he didn't want something more prestigious? That
I can't remember where I read this or saw this week that apparently he felt out a bunch of NFL teams, and most of them said, we're good. And that surprises me a lot. Like, if you're the Giants, you don't think you win the press conference at a minimum, hiring that guy to bring him back home where he kind of made his bones as an offensive coordinator, and he's 10 wins short of the all-time wins record in the NFL. So this, to me, literally seems like he's setting up his son Steve to be a head coach because that's part of the clause of the contract, supposedly. I don't get it. I have no idea if he understands this whole NIL crap. I really don't. Unless, again, and you're seeing more teams do this, you're hiring a general manager to do those things.
Which he's already done. They named their general manager earlier today.
Right. So, yeah, it's just you go from you go from one legendary old goat and Mac Brown to another.
In some ways, are NFL guys maybe more cut out for the NIL era because it's what they've already dealt with? It's just guys that are mercenaries that are all about their money?
Maybe. But you may, as a college, want to seek that guy, which credit to North Carolina for doing that, or he maybe reach out to them first, however it worked. Credit to them, I guess, for going
I read that he initiated it, yeah.
He had a 400-page manifesto he gave them about what he was going to do to make the program relevant.
Anytime you use the M word, I get scared. I don't like the M word.
Here's the only thing I can think of. He and Michael Jordan have cut a behind-the-scenes deal for NIL.
I'm guessing that's not the case.
Probably not, but
I'm just going out on a limb here.
I'm sorry, I don't see this.
Do you
working.
not think the Bengals would have been thrilled to have Bill Belichick as their head coach?
I don't know. I think he'd have been thrilled because he is a huge Paul Brown fan. I mean that sincerely. He thinks Paul Brown hung the moon.
Well, I mean, that would have been an absolute home run for the fans. I don't know how the organization feels, but the fan base would have done that 100%, right?
And that's where, again, there are going to be a lot of openings. There already are a lot of openings in the NFL. And there are going to be more. And he, in theory, should have had the pick of the litter. And
I can't imagine any fan base that wouldn't want him.
Right. And I'm going to guess he did feel that out. And it felt like the organization went, we're good. I don't know.
It just seems so strange. I can't make sense of the whole situation.
I can't either. I thought it was him like, I'm going to just test the waters and see where this goes, to he's the North Carolina head coach.
I'm so jaded from the internet. I saw this reported multiple times, and each time I didn't believe, and I kept thinking, like, why are people running with that joke?
I know, man.
Like, I thought it was a hoax type thing that maybe a burner had, but then I saw reputable people putting it out, and I was like, why is that getting legs? And I continued to not believe it until at a certain point I was just like, wait, it's actually already done? He actually is their coach now? That's bizarre.
Yeah, insane.
Share a crosstown shootout story or experience you've had that we all may find interesting.
I don't think it's interesting. I just remember being in a bar watching the Lenny Brown moment and just the reaction of everybody. It was a Kentucky bar, so and there were some UC fans, Xavier fans, but just the reaction of Lenny Brown making that shot in that moment against the number one team in the country. And of course the iconic Andy McWilliams call, number one in the country, number two in the city. I mean, it's still one of those, that to me is probably the most iconic moment of this matchup.
Definitely. I mean, that call is just budget.
It's off the charts.
Even if you're on the UC side of that, you can hate it as much as you want, but you have to acknowledge that is an all-time great broadcasting line.
No question.
Yeah, that is a good one. I will say the brawl. I've brought this up.
I was driving to Akron to coach an AAU tournament when that brawl happened, so I did not. Actually, I was going to Akron to do state football. I'm sorry. But I remember listening to the game, so I didn't see that actually take place.
I've said many times, that was my favorite day on the beat. I love that game still to this day. And it used to be when you covered games at Xavier, it was like the best place in the world to cover a sporting event because they had courtside seating all the way around. The whole sideline and the baselines was just media all the way around. So everyone working the game had a courtside seat for the most part. unless it was like maybe the shootout had some overflow, but that was about it for the whole year.
Yeah, when I covered Kentucky, it was courtside sitting at Rupp. Now they're up in the rafters.
Yeah, so you had that going on. So the whole thing is like the brawl is like spilling out like into the sides of the thing. So we're right in the action. I remember Tu Holloway coming over to Eddie Masonette, who was writing for Slam at the time, and he came over and he said, "Tweet this out right now. We just put those MFers in body bags."
It's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah, and that was like before any of the Zip 'em Up stuff had been known publicly or started or anything. He came over, Eddie was sitting next to me, and he said that to him, and Eddie was like, "I'm not tweeting that out." And to me, I was like, all right. And then just the way that whole experience, the rest of the next 24, 48 hours, like Cincinnati was in the spotlight, college basketball was in the spotlight nationally. I think I gained like 2,000 Twitter followers over that 48-hour period when I was first starting out covering the beat. So that'll always be my favorite moment from the shootout, without a doubt. If you could live inside any sports video game, which one would you choose?
One of those MLB games. Those are fairly realistic to me. I'd like to be like truly at the plate against one of those pitchers in a video game, like MLB 2024 or whatever.
I could see you doing Slugfest, the one where you're able to like punch people when you got on base and they drop the ball and then you could take off for the next one and like you turn on fire and stuff.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good concept.
You'd be an ML Slugfest guy. Yeah, or NFL Blitz, MLB Slugfest. NFL Blitz was another one too, where you were like, you'd get the stop and then after the play was over, you were able to just deck the guy.
Stomp the guy.
That would be good for you too. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with this. What's one fashion trend Skinny used to rock in the day that he thinks should come back?
It's funny you say that because I look back at a picture of myself in one of those old pullovers, like those vinyl pullovers back, the ones I'm talking about. You had them, I'm sure.
Like the jacket?
No, they were full pullovers, but they weren't 3/4 zips and they were kind of vinyl-y.
I had like a windbreaker, not like when you say pullover, I'm getting confused. It wasn't like
no, literally like a pullover. Because it had no zipper of any kind. It was a pullover.
Right, but like a windbreaker jacket with no zipper.
Correct.
Yeah. Like people always wear them to golf in.
Yeah.
Used to.
I thought those things were really cool back in the day. And I look back at a picture, I go, I look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. What the hell was I doing? What the hell were any of us doing?
So all the dads used to wear those, or they would wear polos with the vests that were made out of that same material?
Yeah, I didn't wear those, although I kind of like those. I will tell you, I had a ton of these back in the day. I was a big V-neck sweater guy. I liked those.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I was a big V-neck. I wouldn't mind those coming back.
Yeah, I actually like the vest look a lot.
Yeah.
As a dad, I'm kind of going to make that my thing. I think I've been getting into the vest. I've invested in multiple vests for the winter, so I think that's where I'm moving to. It's sort of like an advanced quarter zip. I feel like.
See, I don't want these to go out of style. I think every guy looks pretty good in a quarter zip. I do.
Yeah, quarter zips are the ultimate. They should stay there.
They fit great. They're functional. Everything you want them to be, they are.
Yeah, but I do remember the pullovers that you're talking about that like every golf scramble you'd go to back in the 90s would have like the name of the scramble and you'd get one of those.
Yes.
And then every dad wore those as like 90% of their attire. And
I did too.
You all looked like you were carrying around 40 extra pounds because they were like these big,
awful,
baggy things. It was very
just
strange.
Awful. Yes, they were just awful.
That's a really good one. The one that and it's funny because I remember specifically having this conversation with my dad when I was a kid, and he would wear like calf socks, or not tube socks, but socks that came up to the calf. And we were doing no-show socks at that point. Like, you no-show socks coming out of the shoe. And I'd be like, why you wear that? That's whatever you would call your parents back in those days. You're dumb, corny, uncool. And he would be like, son, these things go in cycles. When I was your age, we'd be laughed out of school and called all those names if we wore no-show socks. Well, now we have gotten to the point where it was flipped all the way back around. And now the kids are apparently making fun of all the adults like myself who are wearing no-show socks. And Skinny, I'm not changing. I can't go back. I can't do the calf socks.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not doing. That's a bad look too. And I've got. So I had, for some reason, I had footies that used to go over my ankle. I don't know why. And now when I look back, those are horrible. What was I thinking?
It's just weird what is in at a given time. And then
as a child of the 70s, there's nothing that looked good back in the 70s. There literally is nothing that looked good.
I think that's right. Yes.
So, yeah, I don't need any of that fashion trend to come back.
No. All
All
right.
right.
That's it.
Appreciate it as always. Thanks so much. We'll be back next week. Don't forget to join Mike Petralia and I after the Bengals Tennessee game on Sunday for our Bengals post game podcast as well. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, a weekly potpourri edition presented by Blake, the Attorney Mason.